When Order 66 concluded, and the last shot was fired on that day, the galaxy would weep over the death of their Jedi protectors, but a little over 250 survivors escaped the horrid tragedy, and ran with the heart of the Force burning within them. Yet another flame would blaze in that night though, a host of red lightsabers, those coming to snuff out what little light remained. These were the Imperial Inquisitors, the second wave of the Jedi Purge which never truly ended. In canon, they were a small-numbered group with rotational dual-blade lightsabers who would identify one another as brother and sister. Each one was a former Jedi Knight plucked from their life and twisted into becoming the hunters of it. They were an excellent addition to the mythos of the Purge. But the brother and sisterhood of the Inquisitors is not one that we'll be exploring today, because long before the rotary sabers were spinning, Star Wars Legends gave us the first Inquisitors, disturbing men and women who were much closer to Sith and much more dangerous than simple Imperial agents. Greetings lore junkies, and welcome to the archives. We've been pretty interested in this topic for a while, and we're excited to bring it to you. Just about everything in modern canon has its Legends counterpart, and the Inquisitors are no exception. However, what makes the Legends Inquisitors so unique is how truly mysterious they are. In canon, the faction is explored in great detail. We're well aware of the structure of their organization, their training practices, and the backstories of almost each and every agent. But the Legends Inquisitors are much more vague. They mostly operate in the background of the EU novels, rarely bringing the spotlight on themselves until a select few decide to rise to the heights of Dark Lords. And so we'll go ahead and be upfront on one thing. Many of the Legends Inquisitors only exist as footnotes in galactic history. A good handful exist primarily as quest givers, even NPCs in the long shutdown MMO Star Wars Galaxies. We'll mention a few for completion's sake, but since there are at least a dozen that have no information on them save for their name, we will be mostly keeping to the ones that have real stories. But now my friends, if the canon Inquisitors are dogs, let us introduce you to the Wolves of Legends. The Legends Inquisitors are very different from their canon incarnations. For one thing, they are much less unified in their goals and operate far more independently. While they group up in terms to accomplish a goal, more often than not, one Inquisitor will be in charge of a particular task within the Empire. A lot of the time, these tasks are relegated to interrogation. When the Empire is dealing with Jedi, or particularly resistant subjects, they will try torture or truth serum injections. But if those fail, then that is when they call upon the Inquisitor. Inquisitors rarely failed to extract exactly what they desired. Grand and High Inquisitors receive their instructions straight from Sidious himself, and they distribute those orders to the lesser agents appropriately. Which brings us to the next thing that makes them so different. In Legends continuity, Inquisitors hold much more power in the Empire. Of all of the Force-sensitive branches in the Empire, the Inquisitors are the highest ranking, rising above the Prophets of the Dark Side, and even the Emperor's hands. Those in the Grand and the High Inquisitor category often had their own Star Destroyers, and in the case of Inquisitor Jerick, sometimes even their own fleets. Along with this, they vary widely in personal strength, with some so embarrassingly weak that they fail to match up to the canon Inquisitors, while others are so powerful that they rival the power of Darth Vader. Interestingly, the base of Inquisitors was originally located in the Jedi Temple of Coruscant. For those of you that may not know, while in canon, the Jedi Temple was transformed into the Imperial Palace, but in Legends, it was largely left as an untouched tomb. But the Inquisitors would temporarily use it as their headquarters, but the base of operations would be moved to the deep core world of Prakith, where Citadel Inquisitorius would be constructed. This was the place where they would conduct their horrid interrogations of Jedi, and even do a little experimenting of their own. The Inquisitors were less militaristic and more mythical. They delved into dark side sorcery, and would even use the knowledge of the Sith to their advantage. Uniformly, they would wear some kind of armor made from a material known as ultrachrome, a superconductive and a lightsaber-resistant alloy used in starship construction during the Great Sith War. Some of them would wear what is known as Tausen amulets, made from the excreted substance of Force-resistant Tausen creature. This blurred their presence in the Force, making the Inquisitors nearly impossible to detect by other Force wielders. But all of this focus on the dark side made them a bit alienated from the rest of the Imperial forces. They had very little mentions in official Imperial material. This led Luke Skywalker himself to theorize that either the Sith were trying to keep them a secret, or the Imperial military didn't trust them. This does make sense, as while not all of Legends Inquisitors were former Jedi, many of them were. The closest clue we have to their origins comes from the writings of Darth Sidious. Sidious describes how he captured most of the failed Padawans and knights from the Jedi Service Corps, specifically from the Agra Corps, and had them ferried to his fortress world of Biss. There, they were left to starve, to stew in the dark side energies of the world. Finally, they were ordered to fight one another to the death. Lord Vader personally oversaw this aspect of their training and would hand select the few that stood out. The rest would be executed. And from here, the potential Inquisitors would be taken through a rigorous series of tortures to fully turn them to the dark side. According to more writing from Sidious, the torture was not always physical. It could be psychological or emotional, or perhaps no torture would be involved at all. All they needed was a little push. Whatever was needed though, to pull this specific Jedi to the dark side, Sidious would do it. Once the first generation of Inquisitors was established, a Grand Inquisitor would oversee the introduction of the rest of the members, though the Sith were always the ones who gave the final verdict on new recruits. Afterwards, if an Inquisitor ever captured a Jedi, it was their job to turn them to the dark side. If the Inquisitor failed, then they would have to eliminate the subject. And now that we're familiar with the organization and methods of the Legends Inquisitors, let's meet each one personally. Going rank by rank, we will begin with the Grand Inquisitors. Malorum is the first to speak of, as he is one of the original, perhaps even one of the founding members of the Inquisitorius. Malorum was originally an Imperial intelligence agent with a sensitivity to the Force that passed under the notice of the Jedi. Following the Purge, Malorum was visiting the Jedi Temple. There, he discovered a hologram of Emperor Palpatine addressing Anakin Skywalker as Lord Vader, the very same security tape once viewed by Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda. And thus, he became one of the few people aware of Vader's secret. The knowledge of Vader's identity drove Malorum into an obsession over the Dark Lord. He was eventually found by Palpatine and placed in charge of the new Inquisitorius program, along with a female Inquisitor by the name of Hydra. Malorum would make it his mission to discover all he could about Anakin. With bribes and digging into surveillance systems and old documents, Malorum began to piece together the events of Anakin's fall to the dark side, and even discovered his relationship with Padme. He went so far as to hire Boba Fett to investigate Naboo and the asteroid facility Paulus Massa in order to learn more about Padme's death. All of this was in hopes of integrating himself with Vader and eventually replacing him as the Emperor's apprentice. His end goal was to eventually usurp the Emperor himself and rule the galaxy. During this time, he was also assigned to hunt down the ex-Jedi Ferris Olin, who was on the run and had received instruction from Obi-Wan Kenobi on Tatooine. Kenobi would quickly learn that Malorum was piecing together Anakin's past, and he encouraged Olin to stop him before he learned of Luke and Leia. Back on Coruscant, Malorum established his office in the former living quarters of Grand Master Yoda, and while there, Lord Vader paid him a visit. In their discussions, he mentioned Paulus Massa, hoping to please the Dark Lord with his knowledge. However, the mention of that place enraged the Sith, and earned Malorum a near-fatal choking. Following the incident, he would attempt to bomb the Jedi Temple to disgrace Vader's reputation in the eyes of the Emperor, but his plan was foiled by none other than Ferris Olin, who had taken Obi-Wan's mission to put a stop to the Grand Inquisitor's scheme. Malorum would then travel to Naboo himself and ask around for information about Padme Amidala. However, his questioning was met with elusiveness and refusal from the Queen of Naboo and other politicians. Eventually, he found out that Anakin had a child that had lived, but before he could do anything with this knowledge, he was confronted by Ferris Olin for a final duel. The two would enter a ferocious battle within the Naboo power generator core, but Olin would note that Malorum's fighting style was sloppy and untrained. He relied on agility, but lacked grace. He had strength, but had no idea how to use it efficiently. Ultimately, it was this failure of training that would cost the first Grand Inquisitor his life. He had attempted to use his telekinetic abilities in tandem with a force-infused jump in order to catch his lightsaber, to leap over a deep core reactor pit at the same time. But the Inquisitor lost control and was unsuccessful, plummeting down into the power generator core and dying instantly. The position of the Grand Inquisitor would then be succeeded by his underling, the emotionless female named Hydra. Hydra's run as the Grand Inquisitor was uneventful and largely unfortunately unrecorded as well. Hydra would eventually be replaced by Ladinair Torben, who served as the Grand Inquisitor until the year 4 BBY. During the last days of the Republic, Torben served as the Director of Information on the Judicial Department, acting as the spokesman for the Department for the Jedi Order. After the establishment of the Empire, though, he was inducted formally into the Inquisitorius. After succeeding Hydra, he became one of the most dignified Inquisitors to ever hold the position of the Grand Inquisitor. He was responsible for the dissolution of the Church of the First Frequency, a religion of Force fanatics that opposed the Empire. Torben thought rather highly of himself, and would be one of the very first Inquisitors to give himself the title of Lord. During his tenure, Torben would travel to a remote planet with some of his fellow Inquisitors in search for a Jedi fugitive. Instead, though, they found the Dark Jedi Arden Lyn, who had been lying in stasis for tens of thousands of years. She had been one of the original Dark Jedi that predated the Sith, taking part in the First Great Schism of 24,500 BBY. When awakened, Lyn fought off the Inquisitors, but had her arm dismembered by Torben. Rather than kill her, he had the sense to take her to Sidious, where she was subsequently made into one of the Emperor's hands. Lord Torben held his illustrious position for many years, but in that time he also gained many enemies. Whether from corporate entities or jealous underlings, he was the victim of many assassination attempts, and eventually, one of them succeeded. In 4 BBY, he would be replaced by Jase Yasso, a male Zabrak. Yasso is one of the Star Wars Galaxy's Inquisitors that has very little characterization. We do know, however, that he was primarily tasked with overseeing the Dathomir system during the Galactic Civil War. Moving on to the next rank, we have the High Inquisitors. There were several of these at one time, but among the most notorious was Antennis Tremayne. But in talking about his story, we will end up covering a few others as well, since they're closely tied to his. Antennis Tremayne was trained by Master Dav Kilanu during the Clone Wars. During the war, Kilanu was killed behind enemy lines, which left Tremayne captured by Separatist forces. He remained in their custody throughout the remainder of the Clone Wars. When he was eventually discovered, he was thrown into a pit deep within the world of Biss with multiple other young Jedi that had been found by the Empire. Vader commanded them to fight him with nothing but wooden staffs, and none of them could so much as make Vader flinch. Tremayne, however, took notice of Vader's chest panel, pressing one of the buttons to disrupt the Dark Lord. Vader took note of the child's ingenuity, and recruited him along with 3 others. Their names were Gweleb Aplef, Lanu Pask, and Halmir, all of whom we'll speak of in a moment. Tremayne would make a name for himself as an expert interrogator, and one who had a tendency to become obsessed with his current targets. In his earliest outings, he would pursue a Jedi by the name of Corwin, and an Order 66 survivor by the name of Darren Arcanian. Tremayne would subject Corwin to weeks of torture and malnourishment, hoping that he would give up the position of Darren Arcanian. Soon enough, the Master came to the rescue of his student, and the two entered a duel, resulting in Arcanian's death. An enraged Corwin attacked Tremayne, costing him his eye and one of his arms. Tremayne managed to escape with his life, and was cybernetically repaired to make up for the loss of his body parts. Tremayne would go on to serve the Empire during its entire run, battling Jedi and rebels alike. Himself, Halmir, and the other 2 would all dedicate themselves to hunting down the Padawan by the name of Drake Logan and his friends. Despite coming close to capturing them several times, the Inquisitors repeatedly failed to capture the trio, leading to Lord Vader taking up the task personally. Tremayne and his comrades would go on to outlive the Empire itself, but afterwards, each would split off to follow their own path. Gweleb served the resurrected Emperor Palpatine during the Dark Empire crisis. Lanu would ally herself with an Imperial warlord by the name of Sinshind, and Tremayne would ally with another Imperial warlord but would ultimately be defeated by the New Republic. Halmir would go on to play second fiddle to another, more powerful Inquisitor by the name of Jerick, and afterwards, he fades to obscurity. But speaking of High Inquisitor Jerick, he is the next individual that we want to talk about, and the most dangerous Legends Inquisitor of them all. Jerick was a student of Jocasta Nu. His main occupation was in archaeology, where he would travel the galaxy and traverse ruins and sites of great historic significance. As a historian and an academic, he was initially interested in learning as much as he could about different cultures, so that he could achieve entire collections of information. When Order 66 went down though, he was deep in the unknown regions on an expedition, and didn't learn that the Jedi Order had fallen until he got back to known space. By this point, his apprentice, Amisa Daries, had already joined the Inquisitors ahead of him. Jerick was eventually located, and convinced by Tremayne to join them. Jerick being pushed to the dark side proved to be a simple task, as he had always been fascinated by its powers. Jerick was known to be dazzlingly intelligent and exceptionally cunning. He used these skills to hunt down Jedi who he knew were off on no-contact missions in various places deep in the galaxy. Jerick was aware of the movements of the Jedi shadows, and knew where other scholars like himself would hide. But rather than killing them, Jerick found and converted them, building his own accumulation of dark Jedi within the Empire that were loyal solely to him. Soon, Sidious had taken a certain interest in Jerick due to his background in Jedi research, so the Emperor appointed him to the status of High Inquisitor, and gave him a place within the higher Imperial courts. This placed him directly beneath Palpatine. His new position was much like his first in the Jedi, to be a researcher of knowledge and artifacts, but this time for the Emperor. Once again, he became the foremost scholar in his field, and an expert in Sith lore. But the more he studied of their history, the more obsessed he became. He learned how to read, write, and speak the language of the ancient Sith, which was knowledge only reserved for those who actually trained as Sith Lords. He would even go as far as to add Sith tattoos to his own face, which took the form of thin black lines flowing from the corners of his mouth. He became so adept in this field of study that Sidious went so far as to allow him to actually read his own work in progress, the Dark Side Compendium. Jerick was one of the few people to ever lay eyes upon Sidious's writing while he was still alive, and he was well aware of the Emperor's identity as a Sith Lord, and the relationship of the Rule of Two with Vader. But Jerick began growing so powerful and ambitious that Sidious would take away his privileges of Sith knowledge, concerned that he was learning too much too quickly. Jerick decided to lay low with his fleet, as well as his underlings for many years, and was still laying low even when the Empire fell. By that point, Jerick came out of hiding and took the moniker of Lord, when he then began searching for a rumored font of unlimited dark side and light side power. He would eventually find this power in the location known as the Valley of the Jedi on the planet of Ruusan. Jerick absorbed this energy and temporarily became omniscient within the Force, but he was undermined and defeated by the Jedi upstart Kyle Katarn. By the end of Jerick's life, it was said that he gained enough power to rival Vader. His knowledge of ancient Sith techniques allowed him extraordinary telepathic abilities that could pierce the minds of nearly any Force sensitive. Jerick even had the ability to instantly kill someone with a blast of pure dark side energy, a power normally reserved for the likes of Exar Kun and the Ancients. The next few have much shorter biographies, mostly appearing as footnotes in the lore. We have High Inquisitor Mok Slozin, who was an Enturan, whose people valued the ideals of pain and suffering. Slozin was a sadist who enjoyed torture and was famous for programming his own tendencies into interrogation droids. Unfortunately, he was sometimes so zealous for torture that he got too enthusiastic, his victims dying before he could extract any meaningful information. Then we have Mal Sikander, who is a High Inquisitor of little consequence, only appearing in Star Wars Galaxies. Volitar is another largely unknown Inquisitor. Our only intel about him is that he perished at the planet of Skorupan, killed by a ragtag group of adventurers. But now let's move on to an Inquisitor with an extensive story, with Alderic Cassius Brandel, a man who got his life started as a Force-sensitive stage actor on the planet of Trualis. He was incredibly popular with many audiences, largely because of his flawless performance in the lead role of the popular tragedy. He was very well experienced in sword fighting due to most of his roles involving such action sequences. Soon, his fame spread with the hollows of his performance, making it all across the Empire. One such fan of his work was the Emperor himself. Palpatine was entertained by Brandel's performance, but not for the same reasons that others were. The Emperor recognized Brandel's mastery of the Force, the way he subtly influenced the audience's emotions as he wove a captivating story. Palpatine was also able to look inside Brandel and pinpoint his desires and his fears. After years of studying and portraying tragic figures, Brandel had become almost obsessed with becoming a tragic hero himself. The Emperor offered Brandel a chance to leave the pretend world he lived in and to embrace the real thing. He would manipulate and drive Brandel to the dark side, pulling him into accepting his ultimate role as a High Inquisitor. Palpatine made him believe that the ideals of the Inquisitors were noble, and Brandel bought it hook, line, and sinker. This even came at the cost of his own family, as his wife saw his darker nature and hid their child away from him. Soon, Inquisitor Brandel became one of the Emperor's favorite, and he went around slaughtering and butchering all who opposed the Grand Empire. Killing became so second nature to him that he lost count. at least until the day many years later where he destroyed the wrong village and was forced to think about the man that he had become. Eventually, he would depart the Emperor's service, becoming one of the only Inquisitors to ever go rogue. He would train up a young girl by the name of Fable Aston to become a capable wielder of the Force, and he searched to reconcile with his lost son. Unfortunately though, his past caught up with him, and he was forcefully dragged back into his old life as an Inquisitor by none other than Tremayne. He would attempt and fail to tempt either his son or Fable to the dark side, and after a final duel, he was ultimately unable to bring himself to kill his son. He would slink back into the shadows and was never seen from again, neither as an Inquisitor, a father, or an actor. And so, he would ultimately receive what he had wanted, the life and end of a tragic hero. Moving on from the High Inquisitors, there were many lesser Inquisitors, and as we stated, some have no information to them except for their names, so we'll tell you what we can find about the rest of them. We have Jerick's former apprentice, Amisa Darius, who would hunt down a group of Jedi survivors known as the Children of the Jedi, and managed to find siblings Logan and Rogonda Ismarin. She killed Logan in front of her sister, turning Rogonda to the dark side in the process. But afterwards, she would join Grand Inquisitor Torben and Tremayne in discovering the Dark Jedi Arden Lyn. When the ancient Darksider awoke, she critically injured Tremayne and would kill Jerick's former Padawan. Moving on, we have Ferrus Olin, who was only an Inquisitor temporarily. As we mentioned earlier, Olin was an ex-Jedi being hunted by Malorum and Vader. Directly after Malorum's death, the Emperor contacted Olin and enticed him to join the Inquisitorius, giving him a deadly offer. The Emperor promised him knowledge that would defeat Lord Vader, which was Olin's entire goal in life: revenge. The young Jedi agreed, hoping to use the Emperor for his knowledge just to defeat the Dark Lord. Sidious taught him how to unleash his anger, to internalize it for power. Afterwards, Olin would end up learning from a Sith holocron which was gifted to him by Palpatine, giving him the ability to draw on anger of others to fuel his own power. He would work with the Inquisitorius for a very short while, but his entire plan was just to get close to Vader. Eventually, he would enact his plan, and Olin managed to go the distance with the Dark Lord in a lightsaber duel, something that was thought to be impossible. But midway through the duel, Olin received a vision from the light side, and came to realize that the path of the dark side was not his destiny. Olin threw the fight, and attempted to retreat, but was caught by Vader and was choked out. He was thought to be dead. However, the Jedi managed to crawl away from the encounter and went into exile. The next Legends Inquisitor we have is Vaylin Draco, another Jedi Knight who was brought to the dark side by the resolve to end the Separatists during the Clone War. After the war, he would become a very ambitious Inquisitor, who was the first to notice Senator Bail Organa could potentially be a rebel sympathizer. The Inquisitor would spend a long time attempting to find evidence of Organa's treachery, and make enemies with the Alderaanian resistance movement. During this time, his attention would also be drawn to the planet of Almas, where a Force Nexus was seen developing. He was sent to investigate the Nexus, and would come across the ruins of the Almas Academy, a Jedi stronghold that had been established there to monitor the planet. Within the ancient ruins, the Inquisitor came across a Sith holocron, one constructed by Darth Revan, wherein he learned many powerful dark side secrets that he would use to increase his power. Unfortunately though, his new powers were not enough to save him from an attack from the Alderaanian resistance. He was left with devastating injuries, and needed to be cybernetically repaired. In revenge, he would attack a resistance task force and capture Dania, his former Jedi Master. He would take his master to the Citadel Inquisitorius on Prakoth for torture. A rescue went to free her, but Dania sacrificed herself in order to weaken her former apprentice. Afterwards, he was finally killed by the resistance group. The same fate befell both Inquisitors Jorad and Nolor. Jorad fell in combat when he attempted to keep the rescue team from getting to Master Dania, and Nolor would die in the same battle that would kill Vaylin Draco. Obviously, these are on the weaker end of the Inquisitors. Next, we have Inquisitor Draynene, who is a female Inquisitor who set herself apart with unconventional interrogation methods. Rather than beginning with torture, she would use her charm and beauty to seduce the victims, to lull them into a sense of false security. Then they would reveal information as a way to make her happy, since she made them believe that she was on their side. Only then would she reveal her true nature and become ruthless and cruel. She reminds me of Darth Phobos. Many Imperial officials were afraid of her, and rarely called her services despite how effective she was. Not all Inquisitors worked for interrogation and hunting though. Some were scientists, such as Zerot Corlin, who was stationed on Dathomir during the Galactic Civil War and was a lead researcher of Night Sister magic, attempting to deduce how it could aid the Empire. He would attempt to harness the powers of the crystals situated in the Night Sisters' headdresses, but upon failure to do so by machinery, he would begin experimenting on the Night Sisters themselves, attempting to hook up their brainwaves to the crystals in order to activate their power. In the process, many Night Sisters were horrifically lobotomized. Next is Sancor, an Inquisitor who worked alongside Malorum to uncover information about Darth Vader's children. Interestingly, this Inquisitor did not use a lightsaber, but had blasters, and used other more traditional weaponry. Obi-Wan Kenobi would find this Inquisitor, disguising himself as a medical officer that Santor wanted to meet with. Kenobi managed to snag a crucial record disc that contained evidence of the Skywalker twins within it, and when Sancor attempted to stop him, Kenobi would fire a wrist rocket, which missed and collapsed a platform that he was standing on. This caused the Inquisitor to fall onto a table full of sharp medical instruments, killing him instantly. Next is an Inquisitor named Shine, who was a female and mostly stayed behind in the Citadel of Prakith. Shine would continue to reside at the Citadel even after the collapse of the Empire and their master. All the while, she would find any Force wielders she could and bring them back to the Citadel, continuing the quest to turn them all to the dark side. Eventually, it would take Jedi from Luke Skywalker's new Jedi Order to locate her on the world. She initially greeted them with hospitality, but when her true motives became clear, the Jedi dispatched her in a sudden and a violent attack. And finally, we reach Mas Sera and Ural Chael, who were Inquisitors assigned by Vader to find the Jedi Jax Paven. They would track him through the underlevels of Coruscant. Mas was killed by the Padawan Kejen Savaros, who lost control and unleashed a Force repulse, using the dark side that ultimately disintegrated the Inquisitor. Chael met a much more gruesome fate when he was shot in the throat by a deadly, modified protocol droid by the name of I-5. These were all of the Legends Inquisitors that are worth mentioning, some of them more wildly successful than the entire canon list of Inquisitors combined. Inquisitors like Tremayne, but especially Jerick, who again is said to rival the power of Darth Vader at his height. Despite how effective they were, Palpatine was not very impressed with the Inquisitors in either continuity. According to him, they were fools who disgraced the infallibility of his empire with their deaths. It's likely that Sidious expected a lot more out of the people who were the highest ranking Force wielders in the entire empire. But then of course, he didn't want them to get too good at their job, like Jerick, who Palpatine had to start placing limits and parameters on. But what do you think? Which set of Inquisitors do you think you prefer now that you're more familiar with both continuities? And if the canon and Legend Inquisitors were to fight, who would come out on top? Which of these agents of the dark side ultimately caught your eye? Let us know if you want to get their own dedicated video if you're interested in one specifically. And if you've watched till the end, thank you so much for sticking around. Your support means everything here at the Archives. We can't wait to see you in the next one. And until then, may the Force be with you.